All right, so we're here with Ian Caton with Wood Thrush Nursery. I did pronounce that right, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, all right. So he's going to be speaking at the Jesse Peterman Memorial Library
Mm-hmm.
on January 29th. He is engaged in a lot of, a lot of, I guess, tutorials or a lot of informative talks on native plants and how to get about growing a native garden.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with the obvious question. How did you start?
Yeah. Well, I was a landscape worker for a long time in Philadelphia. I worked for a landscape firm up there that specialized in using native plants. And I did that for like about 15 years or so. It's what my degree is in. And at that time, I got kind of a little bit tired of the Northeast traffic and commuting and dealing with perhaps less than ideal clientele, and thought, it'd be kind of nice maybe to run your own nursery instead of like buying plants and putting them in. And I had this long going relationship with a fellow in West Virginia who owned a nursery named Peter Hughes at Enchanter's Garden. And, we had a good rapport. I would go down and visit. I'd known him for about 10 years or so. And he was retiring and was looking for someone to kind of continue the nursery on. He had all this nursery stock and had spent all this time developing these growing techniques and things. And he said that if I wanted to take it over, that I could take it over if I wanted to. And he said all it would cost you is $1. So I took it over and I ran it there for several years. But after a few years of running it there and getting used to it and learning, about how to grow stuff and do things from him, I began to think, I was doing mostly mail order work. People weren't really visiting the nursery because it was a little bit out of the way there, and the way to the nursery was quite rough and tumble. It was a little bit like driving up a cliff. So we decided, well, we want most of our visitation does come is in the Blacksburg area. And we kind of wanted the nursery on our own property as well, So we thought, well, let's relocate the nursery to the Blacksburg area, have it on our own property. And we looked at Floyd, and Floyd fit the bill. And so we relocated the nursery here. And we renamed the nursery to Wood Thrush Natives. It was my wife's favorite bird song, so that's what we called it. The previous owner actually had some plant patents under the Enchanter's Garden name, so he wanted to hold on to that name. So that's why we changed the name. And I've been running it here since 2017 is the first full running year here in Floyd.
Oh, wow.
And so I've been doing that since then and building it up steadily as every year. More and more.
So I mean, it's really cool. It's hard to see some of the stuff with the snow covered on the ground.
Yeah, it's under snow. So,
but I mean, I've seen some of your work on the website and what you're doing. If you don't mind, tell us what sets you apart from other nurseries. I mean, we have nurseries in a rural area that's going to be common, but what's unique about Wood Thrush?
So there's a couple of unique things about the nursery, the way I run it. Now, there's other nurseries like mine, but we're a fairly minor kind of nursery compared to most nurseries. The typical nursery, retail nursery, buys small plants from somebody else, pots them up, grows them bigger, and sells them. Or they just buy them big and sell them. I grow everything myself from seed. So I'm starting from the very beginning, from seed to seedling, from seedling to plant, and then from plant to the sale. So I'm doing everything, and most nurseries skip that first part. They leave it to somebody else. The other thing that makes it my nursery unique is that I'm using a lot of local or regional provenance. So I know the genetics of my plant. Like I'm collecting seeds from local places, although not always local. The main thing for me is that I know where the seed comes from, whether it's local or whether it's from New York, that it's source identified. So I can tell people this is a New York genetic strain of something. It's not just something that could have come from Nebraska, even if it does grow here as well natively. Mm-hmm. The genes of plants are different in Nebraska than here, so things may not do as well. So it is kind of important to know, in some cases with native plants, where your plants originated, and so that's another thing that sets me apart. That I know where my stuff comes from.
Well, and speaking of which, I noticed on your website that there's a lot of plants that you grow outside of the greenhouse. And there's a particular reason for that, right? I mean, they're exposed to a lot more harsh environments, right, and it's a lot more difficult. So what is the reason behind growing them a large portion outside?
Everything is grown outside. The greenhouse is only for seed production. I only use the greenhouse to propagate the seeds and to do cuttings and to be a dry place to work in during the wintertime, dry and warm. So it's primarily a propagation center. All finished plants are exposed outside to the natural rhythms and cycles of nature. And that means that they're already hardy and used to the level of sunlight, the level of heat, whether it's cold or warmth or the amount of water they're getting. They're already settled into that. And that's another thing that distinguishes me from a lot of nurseries. A lot of nurseries grow their stuff under plastic. They heat it up in the spring real early so that things are blooming in April that shouldn't be blooming until June. And that stuff might be frost tender still. So you take a plant home and stick it in the ground in April and we get a late frost. It may fry the leaves off. They also feed them heavily of fertilizer and water, which makes them big and bold and beautiful. But also, again, it's a lot that makes the plant kind of weak. They get used to that rich living. Mm-hmm. So I keep my plants on a lean diet in terms of water and fertilizer, and I keep them outside where they are in sync with the seasons. So,
and also they're exposed to one of the things Floyd County is known for, and that's wind.
Yes, that definitely is another thing, and people, you might be surprised how much wind can make a difference. Wind is very drying, and so a plant that is used to being exposed to drying conditions, they will react. They will grow extra roots, or they'll get stiffer. They'll produce thicker stems. They may produce chemicals in their leaves that make them more resistant to desiccation, and may make them more resistant to insect predation as well. That's another thing a lot of greenhouse grown plants are not great at, is insect resistance, because again, they're so lush and bold and beautiful, the bugs just eat them up. So,
well, I mean, what attracts us to the plants is what attracts the bugs too.
That's true. And I want, that's one of the other big things about growing native plants is you are trying to feed nature with native plants. But there's, especially with a greenhouse, when you're a nurseryman, there's a limit to the amount you can allow that to happen to your nursery stock before they start looking a little disfigured. So you did say one of the purposes is to feed nature. Yeah.
So you focus on native plants.
Yes, native plants are the focus.
So what is the main benefit of focusing on native plants for anybody who's growing native plants in this area? What is that? What is the, I guess, the huge benefits, the main reason why someone would do that?
The main reason someone would do that would be is if you're interested in providing a garden that is more than just an ornament. Traditional gardening has been strictly aesthetic and ornamentation. But when you're using native plants, when you're using ecology, you're not just interested in the aesthetics of your garden, you're also interested in who is using the garden besides yourself. The birds, the butterflies, the bees, the insects, lizards, whatever. I mean, if when you start to spell it out, it's kind of obvious, although people don't usually think about it with their garden, is that plants are the bottom of the food chain. Everything eats them. So birds are reliant on plants because birds mainly eat insects. Insects mainly eat plants. And the insects mainly eat native plants. Most of our insects are geared exclusively to eat the native plants that are around here. They cannot eat the exotic plant material. And there's a lot of studies done by Doug Tallamy, a fairly well-known fella, showing that if you look at plants from Europe or plants from Asia that are brought to America, they are not as productive in terms of feeding the insect life. And if you don't have insect life, you don't have bird life. So it all runs from the plants all the way up to the top. So if you like birds, if you like butterflies, if you like bees, if you like all that stuff, you have to use native plants at least as your backbone. I'm not a purist. I love peonies. But, I'm not going to kid myself that a peony garden is of great benefit to a broad spectrum of living things here. Peonies evolved in Asia, and they probably have their own suite of critters that rely on them there. But here, they probably feed a few bees, and that's about it. So that's the reason for using native plants. It's makes your garden an extension of nature. And there's so little, nature, as a lot of people know, there's so little of it truly left that's intact and still functioning properly.
So doing native gardens, especially getting that more popular, having that native garden is a huge benefit to the ecosystem.
Absolutely, it is the ecosystem. I mean, again, with traditional gardening, there was thought that there's your garden, and then there's everything else. The idea is that your garden becomes a part of everything else. That's another thing, is that it gives you sense of place. A garden of native plants looks like a mountain ecosystem. It looks like it fits in. Obviously, neat, tidy, clipped hedges looks more like Versailles. It looks like a traditional English or French garden. I mean, unless you own your own French palace, you probably aren't necessarily going to want a clipped boxwood hedges absolutely everywhere.
It's a lot of maintenance too.
It is, yes. Well, that's another big benefit to using the native plants, is that they certainly grew here without any care from any people. As long as you choose them correctly and plant them properly, they don't need anything. They don't need fertilizer. They don't need water. They don't need anything at all.
Okay. So if someone's wanting to go about and start a native garden, like they hear this message and say, I've been doing gardening all wrong. I want to do a native garden. What is the best place for them to start?
Well, the two things I would go to would be books. Look for books on the native plants of your area. Don't go to the floras, the technical books necessarily. Unless you're a botanist, that stuff is not going to be that interesting to look at. Get books that show pictures of the Appalachian flowers for this area. Get garden books. Even if those garden books aren't specifically native, I always, when I was doing landscape work, I had all kinds of garden books, because it was always a great way to inspire yourself for the aesthetic part of it. And to take the aesthetics and merge it with the ecology is what makes a great native garden. And so get books, and then go out into the wild. Go to the national parks, go down to the river, go to places where the wild plants still exist, and see what is attractive to you. Look at what might grow well in your place. What kind of places are similar to your place, and what can you borrow from there figuratively for your garden?
So, I mean, and it would be handy, I guess, to have a field guide.
Yes,
to
field
help
guides.
Identify what you're actually borrowing.
Right. Again, unless you're a botanist, get a field guide that's a good, straightforward, laid field guide. Peterson, or even the old Golden guides, which are kind of geared towards a younger audience. But my first Golden guide I had when I was 5, and it was perfect for learning plants at any age. I still have that book, and I still use it sometimes. So yeah, get yourself a field guide, or just take pictures, familiarize yourself with the plants and the aesthetics of the plants, and when they're blooming and when they're not, and what they're doing. And then, again, like I said, look at garden books, look at books and outdoor experience. They're the two things that have done me well in learning how to do this.
Well, I would say that I'm a novice at best when it comes to gardening. So there's a lot of questions that I would have. Is plant husbandry something that you're familiar with? Because I do know enough to know that sometimes planting 2 plants next to each other does not produce really good results, and then sometimes you want to put 2 together because they help work off of each other.
Yes, that is the case. So if you go into the wild, if you go into nature, you might notice that nature doesn't arrange its plants in neat little 3-foot rows with mulch in between all the plants. These plants are growing on top of one another. And you would think that they're competing, but that really only happens in very disturbed habitats. You find plants kind of competing for space after someone has gone through it with a bulldozer or something. If you go to older ecosystems, you'll find that the plants kind of settle down. Some plants die out, other plants come in, and they come into what's called a mutualism, so that the plants are not competing with one another. When that happens, a lot of plants can grow in the same exact space. The roots of some plants are really deep, and the roots of others are really shallow. So they're not competing underground for the same amount. And of course, some plants are very tall and other plants are very low, so they can be right on top of each other. Some plants are actively growing in the spring and others are actively growing in the summertime. So they can be in the same spot and they're not competing because they're not growing at the same time of year. So if you know about when the plants are growing and when they're not growing, what the root systems look like, what their top growth is like, you can put plants right on top of one another. And by filling that space in, it means that you're eliminating space for weeds. You're eliminating the need for mulch. You're eliminating the need for a lot of cultivation in there. Basically, you're reproducing the kind of situation that an older, well-established native ecosystem has. That's your goal in your garden if you're looking for low maintenance, is you've got to have a lot of plant material in there. If you're going to have a lot of plant material, you have to know how they grow and how they interact. And that, again, comes a little bit with just observing the plants and how they do.
Now with this, there I'm sure are a lot of native plants that are also edible.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And is there any advisement you can give about edible plants that someone may want to grow a garden for, harvesting?
Yeah.
What kind of...
Certainly, I always encourage people to include edible plants. You want to interact with your landscape. You're not just making a landscape for the birds. It's for yourself too. So you can incorporate lots of things into your landscape that are edible. And there's countless books and Facebook groups and web pages and things that will discuss all this stuff. But generally speaking, there are in every area like pretty big, well-known ones that a lot of people may not even realize are native. Persimmons around here are native. A lot of people know about the pawpaw, or at least have heard of pawpaws. Native fruit. It's the North America's biggest berry. It gets to be fruit about that big on it. We have native apples. We have native strawberries. And of course, all the brambles and blueberries and service berries. There's a lot of stuff that's native. And that's not, that's the obvious stuff. It's not even getting into the more esoteric root vegetables and leaf vegetables that, that were like the mainstay of a lot of Native American peoples and early colonists, and has become more popular lately for people to go out and forage them. I've tried some of them, to be honest. A lot of them aren't very good. The fruits are the easiest thing to eat and find nice, but certainly there's a lot of stuff that is edible out there.
So you help to have these classified on your website.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of resources.
Yeah.
But so if a customer orders from you,
mm-hmm.
what resources are you going to be able to give them to make sure their planting experience is as good as it can be?
Well, the website itself contains a lot of this information. I already have the plants sorted according to the kind of sun they want, the kind of water, and whether they're edible or not. Even according to whether or not they're very attractive, especially attractive to pollinators or birds or anything like that. That information is already present when a person purchases. If they want more information, then people are always free to contact me for advice on books or advice on people to talk to or places to go to see things. So basically the website is the resource. I'm the resource. And other than that, they've got to take a little bit of the initiative on there to find this information out. Which I hope they would be. If you're interested in native plants, then you should find this stuff out.
And you also do a lot of public speaking.
Yes, I do.
You do public speaking on these things.
Mm-hmm.
What is the main way? What is the main message you're out there when you're speaking about growing native plants, is it more about the how-to or the why?
I usually include both. I don't necessarily get into the how-to as much. I do some, because the how-to of a native plant garden is mostly the same as it is for any garden. Most people know how to plant. The trick with a native plant garden is resisting the temptation to do all the things that people think you need to do in a garden. Amending the soil, turning it over, adding water, adding compost, doing all that stuff is totally unnecessary when it comes to native plant gardening. So there is some differences, and that's where I usually try to explain. That's where the how comes into in my lectures, is saying, how do native plants fare differently in a landscape compared to a traditional ornamental landscape? And then I do a lot of the why as well, like why would you use them, and what can you do to make sure that a landscape is aesthetically pleasing. I mean, that's the other thing is I'm trying to promote the idea that a native landscape isn't just a pile of weeds. A lot of these plants are common here. Although remember, I lived in Philadelphia, and it was very hard to find a phlox in Philadelphia. So it's not a guarantee that these plants that are quote unquote common are always going to be so. I tried to say that these plants are common, but that doesn't make them of less value. In fact, it makes them of greater value. A common plant is very important to the bird and bee life in the area, and it can be attractive. It's all about how to use these plants in an attractive way, because an unattractive garden is not going to survive for very long. People are going to complain about it. You might be embarrassed of it. You're not going to like it. You can't ignore the aesthetics of it completely, but and so that's where a lot of the how techniques come in.
Okay. Yeah. So you seem to be a wealth of information, and you have your website.
Mm-hmm.
What is the best way for a customer to contact you or to order from you? I mean, of course, the website, which we'll provide below. But what are the other ways that a customer would come
apart
you
from
or purchase?
Well, you can certainly come to the nursery during the growing season, which the nursery opens in 1st of April, roughly, depending on the weather, and closes at the end of October. And I'm usually here. I generally ask that people at least call ahead, because this is a minimally staffed nursery. I run it. There's maybe 1 or 2 other people that are here sometimes. I'm here sometimes because, since I'm collecting seeds, I'm growing everything from seed. I'm sometimes not here for several hours. I'm out collecting seeds or something, or I might be at a farmer's market or something like that. So you make sure that I'm here first. But I generally have open hours on Wednesdays and Sundays. I'm usually guaranteed to be here on those days. And you can call. The phone number is on the website. You can email me. That's certainly a great way to reach me.
So I do have one more question that I didn't get to ask earlier, but I was curious about. What is growing here?
Well, so yes, I am a native plant nursery, but I do occasionally have little side projects. When you're a native plant nursery, you do tend to build relationships with a lot of other people. And this is a little experiment of seeds that I was given from a lady in New Jersey named Tama Matsuoka, who has a company up there that does a lot of native edibles and medicinals and things like that. She makes her own sumac tea that she sells in stores up there, in fact. And she had been interested in a while in mustard, traditional mustard greens, the edible mustard greens. Now, mustard greens have been grown all over the world for a long time. But they originally come from Georgia. That is the European Georgia, not Georgia in America. So these are seeds that are from Georgia and are considered like the archaic original mustard. It is from this plant that broccoli and cabbage and all of and broccolini and all those and Brussels sprouts were bred from.
Oh, wow.
So she asked me to grow this out and produce more seeds of it. And we're probably going to like seed bank this and maybe distribute it around and get some people interested. So this isn't a native plant project, but I do, sometimes people say, would you grow this for me? And I'll say, sure, why not? And she said, would you grow these mustard greens from Georgia? And I said, absolutely.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So
yeah, mustard greens, not native, but like I said, I have all kinds of things going on at the nursery. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Yes,
Ian, for your
thank
time.
you, thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And check him out when he speaks at the library.
Thank you very much. See you then.